Hi, I'm Shanti, the artist behind Shanti Finance. Today is International Peace Day, and I wanted today's painting to be based on that theme, so presenting today's oil painting tutorial for Peace Day.
I started off this painting by sketching out the hand and the dove with a burnt umber and let that layer dry. You can see a lot of texture on this painting because on this canvas because I'm reusing an old canvas on which I had a lot of texture paint. That is definitely not necessary. You can use a smooth canvas and that would work fine. And after laying down the basic structure of burnt umber, I am starting off with laying down the dark areas. You can see I'm being very sketchy and when I'm putting in my colors, I am not worrying about blending at all at this point of time because since it is oil painting, the dry time is pretty much large. I will get a lot of time to blend later. So laying down the colors is my first goal at this point. And I am using a mix of purple, ultramarine blue, and by purple I'm using dioxazine purple in this case. Purple, ultramarine blue, and Payne's gray is what I have used to lay down the basic layer of gray. And in between the two dark areas, the areas where I am drawing the rays of light, I am making some of the areas a little bit darker with the same mix added with a lot of white. So the same mix of Payne's gray, purple, and blue, just added with a lot of white to get a mauvey gray look. You can see that I turned my painting upside down to paint the other area so that I can reach the corners very easily. And you can see that I'm darkening up the shadow areas around the hand and the dove's body. I will add a lot of more dark areas to give create a very nice contrast. And the bright white rays of light will be a sparing few, and most of it otherwise would be dark on the outside. That would give a very nice transition. Once the layer of dark paint is semi-dry, I came back with the same mix, and this time added with a little bit of ivory black to darken those areas up a little bit more. And like I said, I'm adding a lot of darks around the hands in some areas to create the contrast, or rather hype up the contrast. Now with the hands, I started off with adding some blues and purples for the really dark shadows, and then I came back with a mix of red, burnt umber, and white, and a little bit of yellow to create the flesh tint. And at this point you can see that the hand is looking very muddy brown color. It's not at all bright, but it doesn't matter because I will be doing a lot of layers and adjusting the colors a lot. Since I would be using a little bit of glazing for this painting, so after the initial layers, I let that painting dry for a day, and once the painting was dry, I came back and glazed with some additional colors. What glazing does is every layer of glaze reflects the light differently, and that creates a very nice glow. That is the best part of oil painting, in my opinion. Now onto the bird. I first laid down the grays and blues, that is the darker areas, and then I started off with a little gray white color, so it's white mixed with a little bit of purple and Payne's gray, and painting the lighter areas. And once I'm laying down the mid-tone gray color, purple gray color, and after that I will come back with a lot of white and create some of the highlight areas. And for the first day, I did not get the very bright highlights. It mostly is the gray highlights, and then I let the painting dry for a day and came back with and created the highlights even further. For some areas where I added a hint of the feathers, fine details of feathers, I used my fine detail brush. Otherwise, I mostly used my number one flat brush for the entire dove painting. Like these areas around the head and around the bird's wings and tail, where I wanted to create the sharp light reflecting off, bouncing off those areas. There I used my fine detail brush. And for the edges I used pure bright first, and then I pulled those bright whites inwards to a duller gray to create that sharp edge look, or rather to create that bright reflective look of the painting. And I'm brightening up some of the lit up part of the hands with additional amounts of whites mixed with a little bit of flesh tint and a little bit of yellow. You can see now I'm coming back with a little bit more of yellows to brighten up the flesh tint. I'm still working, I'm still on the very first day of paint, where I'm still adjusting the colors and getting the right values in the right areas. At this point, I'm not really worried about the color correction. I'm just getting the values and the shadows in the right areas so that the hand looks very realistic. Once I have put in all the colors and darks and lights following the reference photo that I was using, I let that layer dry, and the next day I came back and adjusted the colors by using a layer of glaze. So this is where I started off next day. I taped up some parts of the painting to create a very sharp edge of the bright light rays that I wanted to create. And here I'm using straight up white right out of the tube, and then fading it out, dragging it in long lines. What this tape does is helps me get very sharp edges, as I want very sharp lines against the area where the dark and light coincides. That kind of makes the contrast look even more prominent, and I'm all about hyping up contrast whenever possible. I think that gives every painting a new dimension. Once I was done with the light rays, I removed the tape and then went back to the darker area and added some more dark colors. Some of the areas were not 100% dry, so I ended up lifting off some of the paint, but then I somehow managed to cover up the entire areas with enough amount of darks. I'm still using the same mix of purple, gray, blue, but this time I'm using a little bit more of blue and a little less of black, so that I have a nice color. In between the very bright rays, I'm coming back with some darker rays of purple to give that contrast even more brightness, or rather hyping the contrast even more. As usual, I'm going back in the shadow areas around the bird's body and the hands and making them more prominent shadows. Now I'm using straight white and making the highlights very prominent in the dove's body. And in the second day, you will get to see the most of the amount of highlights that I've used, and there is very little fine detail that I'm using. It's mostly kind of like a fluffy look that I want to create, some kind of keeping a very blurry look to create that fluffy details. Hyping up some of the highlights in the hand once again. Once the highlights are done, I'm coming back by adjusting the colors now. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about glazing. You will see that I'm painting in very thin layers. The reds and flesh tints that I'm adding are not completely changing the color. They are just adjusting them a little bit and making the whole hand a little bit brighter and a more realistic, more bright colored, and so that the light reflecting off the hands is much more understandable, and it looks much prettier. So that is all about this painting. I hope you liked it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, and do not forget to give me a thumbs up if you like the painting, and do not obviously forget to subscribe if you are not already subscribed. Stay tuned for more.